Hi, this is Rick with Rage Against the Debt. Welcome to this series that explores the dangers and consequences of our nation's growing national debt. With regard to our national debt, have you ever wondered, how did we get into this situation? Or what will the impact really be of all this debt? Or maybe most importantly, what can I do to change the course? Well, if you have these or other concerns about our government's debt and you want to do something about it, welcome to the revolution. There is an old fable from India that you may have heard. It tells the story of a great Maharaja who loved to play chess. He asked the most renowned craftsman in his kingdom to make an exquisite chessboard of rare and precious materials. The craftsman was a wise mathematician. When the Maharaja asked the craftsman what he would charge, the craftsman said that he would make the chessboard in exchange for rice. His price would be that the Maharaja put 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard on day 1. On day 2, the Maharaja would need to put 2 grains of rice on the second square. The next day, the Maharaja would need to put 4 grains of rice on the third square, and the following day the Maharaja would need to put 8 grains of rice on the fourth square, and so on. Each day, the preceding day's grains of rice would be doubled until all 64 squares were filled. Rice is cheap, the Maharaja thought. This is a great deal. So the Maharaja quickly accepted before the craftsman could change his mind. If you've heard this or similar stories, you know that it was not a great deal for the Maharaja. After the first week, there was a total of 255 grains of rice on the board, enough for a small cup of rice. The Maharaja was congratulating himself on what a great deal he had made. After 2 weeks, the total was over 32,000 grains of rice. Still, that was only about 1.5 pounds of rice, enough for a few bowls of rice. The Maharaja was still feeling really good about the deal. After 3 weeks, there were over 4 million grains of rice required, which was still only a couple 100 pounds of rice. The Maharaja wasn't too concerned. But after a month, the Maharaja needed over 2 billion grains, or more than 102,000 pounds of rice. Now the rice was coming by the wagon load, and the Maharaja was definitely concerned. By day 35, the rice was in the millions of pounds, and the Maharaja was in a panic. By day 45, the Maharaja needed over 1 billion pounds of rice, and he was getting it from every corner of the kingdom. By day 64, he was approaching 1 quintillion pounds of rice, and there wasn't enough rice in all of India to pay for the chessboard. This graph shows the grains of rice required by the Maharaja during just the first month. The line is flat until it suddenly takes off on an almost vertical lift and shoots for the sky. This is called exponential growth, and exponential growth quickly becomes uncontrollable and unsustainable. In the fable, the payment of rice goes all 64 days. In real life, it ends much sooner with bankruptcy for the Maharaja, or prison, or maybe worse, for the craftsman. So what does this have to do with our national debt? Well, take a look at a graph of our national debt. See any similarities to the graph of exponential growth? For the past 30 plus years, our federal debt has been growing at an average of over 8% per year. With the aid of compounding, that means that the federal debt will double about every 8 years. What will happen if we continue on this course? At some point, it ends with bankruptcy or maybe even the loss of freedom. Are you aware that federal debt has steadily increased every year since 1957? That means that 80% of the U.S. population hadn't even been born the last time that the federal debt was reduced, and there isn't a single current member of Congress that has ever passed a federal budget that didn't increase the national debt. Every year, the budget has a deficit, meaning that the President and Congress spend more money than the government receives in taxes and revenue. The money to fund this deficit is borrowed, resulting in the national debt steadily increasing. Congress continually sets a new, higher debt limit and then exceeds it when the limit is reached, without any resolution to the growing debt crisis. Congress and the President consistently state the need to run a deficit in the current budget year, but then agree to extensive cuts in future years, combined with optimistic economic forecasts that will resolve the deficit and debt problems in the future. Unfortunately, that bright future never arrives, and each year the process repeats itself.
His budget would double the amount of debt held by the public by the end of his term and triple it on the 10th anniversary of his inauguration. To be sure, our country was already on an unsustainable fiscal trajectory before he took office. Our debt is the product of acts by many presidents and many Congresses over many years. Both of our political parties share the blame in where we've come to.
This is a tough love budget. And starting this year, it steadily decreases the deficit and brings the budget to primary balance by the year 2017.
And it puts the nation on a path towards fiscal sustainability, so that by the middle of the decade, the government will no longer be adding to our national debt as a share of the economy. By the middle of the decade, we'll be able to pay our current bills and remain in primary balance for many years after that.
Thanks for listening. I hope that you'll join us with Rage Against the Debt again. In the next segment, we'll talk about why the national debt really is a critical issue and some of the alarms that have already been sounded about it. And in the subsequent segments, we'll talk about why the growth in gross domestic product, or GDP for short, alone won't fix the growing debt issue, and some of the measures that we need to implement in order to resolve the national debt crisis. Thanks again for listening. This is Rick with Rage Against the Debt. Goodbye for now.